This happened a few years ago to me when I was still living in my childhood home down in California. I had just inherited this family home, so my cousin decided to move in with my husband and I while she was attending college nearby. My cousin and I were both working at the Lego store at the time. I only worked mornings though, and my husband and cousin worked nights, so there were many nights where I was home alone. A couple of weeks before this incident happened, I had been taking stuff out to my car when I realized a large brown van with no back windows was parked just across the street. As I put the stuff in the trunk, the man in the van started making weird noises at me. I turned to see if I could get a good look at his face, but his black Giants baseball cap was pulled all the way down. Thinking this was just your standard creepy guy, I flipped him off and went back into my place. About 2 hours later, I went outside to go somewhere, only to realize he was still parked across the street. I didn't really think anything of it at the time though. I hopped in my car and headed over to my friend's house. As I was driving, I looked in my rear view mirror, only to see the same brown van now following me. I turned on a whole bunch of different streets, and he followed me down all of them. I turned onto the road that my father-in-law lived on and parked there, thinking that if the guy tried anything, I could just run to his place and be safe. When I pulled over in front of my father-in-law's house, the van drove slowly by. I could see into the van now. I saw the man put his hand into a gun position and point at me. He said bang really loudly, and after that he hauled ass and drove off. Now, I had always been a little bit leery of staying home alone. My house had always given me the creeps because of how poorly lit it was. When I was home alone at night, I usually stayed in the kitchen because it was really bright. I was watching a TV show on my computer when all of a sudden I heard a banging on the front door and the handle started to jiggle. This startled me for a moment until I looked up at the time and saw it was around 10 p.m. That was around the time my cousin would be coming home from work. I got up and opened the door, but nobody was there on the porch. I shouted out my cousin's name, but there was still no response. This caused me to call my cousin's cell. "Oh, hey, I'm on my way home from work right now." Before I could say anything else, there were 3 extremely loud bangs on the door that connected the kitchen and the garage, and the knob was shaken violently. I slammed the front door closed immediately, locked and chained it, and sprinted for my room. My aunt called me, while my cousin called the police. I stayed under a blanket until my cousin got home. When she came and got me, I was led outside to talk to the police. I was trying to explain everything that had happened, but the officers along the side of my house were distracting me. I walked over to where they were, but one of the officers held me back. They opened the gate and saw the door to my garage was wide open. All of the officers in the area pulled out their guns and went into the garage, but nobody was there. Afterwards, the police told me it was probably just some kids messing around, but if I ever get scared at home to call them and they'd send someone out. About a week later, I was watching something in my living room with my cousin and my husband. As I was passing by the window next to my front door, I happened to realize there was a guy wearing the same baseball cap as the guy in the van standing outside on the sidewalk. He was just staring at my house. When he noticed I'd seen him watching me, he immediately locked eyes with me and gave me the creepiest smile I had ever seen. I turned and yelled for my husband to go out there, but when I turned around, he was already gone. I will say though that the baseball cap in question was really generic, and a lot of Giants fans wear it. I can't quite say it was the same exact guy for sure, but it sure would be a huge coincidence if it wasn't. 3 days after that, I was home alone at night again. I was obviously very on edge, but trying to ignore it, telling myself nothing was going to happen. I was baking cookies in the kitchen when I thought I heard a knock at my sliding glass door. My whole body tensed up, and I slowly turned to face the noise. The lights in the backyard were off, and the kitchen ones were on. The glare in the window made it impossible to see if someone was outside. Everything was silent for a few seconds. before I heard a banging on the door once again. I screamed, paralyzed in fear. The person ran on the deck from the sliding glass door to the 2 windows in the living room and started knocking on them as well. They came back to the sliding glass door to knock, and then started trying to force open the door. Finally, I came to my senses. I grabbed my keys and ran outside to my car. I locked myself in there and dialed 911. We sold that house shortly after that. I still have a hard time staying home alone, even though I'm 2 states away now. I moved to South Korea for university when I turned 18 years old. I'm 21 now, so this happened over 2 years ago now. Whilst there's definitely been unwanted attention from some guys in the past, most of them get the message that I'm not interested eventually. This, however, was a little bit more unsettling. The university I go to has an institute for language, which is where all of my classes were at the time. It's pretty common knowledge that most foreigners in this part of Korea would know of or study at this institute. It was not abnormal for me to receive random Facebook friend requests from guys wanting to learn English or make foreign friends. Most of the time, I'd just ignore them, unless we had a few mutual friends or I'd met them in person before. I got a friend request from this guy named Nico. We had quite a handful of mutual friends, and he'd messaged me too, saying he was sorry for the randomness of the request. He was just trying to make as many foreign friends as he could. Because he had so many mutual friends, I thought, what the heck? I accepted and messaged him back saying it wasn't really a bother. From what I could tell by his Facebook photos, he was heavily pierced and tattooed, and stated he was Japanese. He had studied in Canada and could speak good English, and was also a foreigner studying at my university. After a few days, he messaged me again and I replied. It was a fairly casual conversation, and would often bring up maybe meeting for a coffee or a movie, which I declined. Suddenly though, he started getting more aggressive for no reason. Every time I'd make a comment, he'd find some way to turn it into an argument, which grew tiring super fast. I started to just ignore him. He'd often ask if I had a boyfriend, to which I'd reply no, and he'd bluntly say we should be together. It was at this point I decided I really didn't want anything more to do with him. I politely declined on the basis that I didn't know him, we'd never met in person, and we hadn't even known each other a full week. He didn't take my refusal very well. He began throwing insults at me based on my looks and saying overly graphic things he'd do to me if he ever saw me. Evidently, I was being stupid not to take him up on the offer, because I'd never do better than him and he'd make me see that. It creeped me out beyond belief, needless to say, so I just blocked and deleted him on everything and tried to forget about it. I mentioned this to a friend of mine, and she immediately knew exactly who I was talking about. Apparently, I was not the first girl he'd added on Facebook and tried to bully into meeting him and being his girlfriend. After asking around with a few more of my friends who were listed as those mutual friends on Facebook, they all described pretty much the exact same situations involving this guy. One girl even told me she'd given him the benefit of the doubt and met up with him. It turned out he didn't even go to our university. He lived over an hour away and would travel there daily to watch and obsess over which girl he would find on Facebook next. He also told her he was born in America and had never even been to Japan, so who knows how much of what he said to anyone was actually true. I felt a bit freaked out by this, but I tried not to let it bother me. After all, I'd never actually seen him around, and I'd blocked him, so what more could happen? That was until about a week or two later. I received a message from him on Facebook from a different account saying how he'd seen me that day at school. This shook me up a lot, since I hadn't even considered that he might actually be watching me in person. I ignored the message and blocked that account too. A few days later, I got numerous messages, all from different accounts claiming to be Nico's friends. They were saying how he'd had his account hacked. Could I please unblock him so he could just explain everything and we could talk it over. I ignored all of these messages too. I just kept receiving more and more though, all of which I'm pretty sure were just Nico himself trying to reach out to get my attention. The more I ignored them, the more violent and aggressive the messages became. I could tell that most of the time when he said he'd seen me, he was lying. He'd say things like, "I saw you at the library today, you fucking slut. You're a fucking four-eyed slut who can't get laid," and other messages to that extent. I knew he was clutching at straws because I never used the school's library to study, and although I wear glasses, I never wear them in public. Because of this, I was fairly confident he was all bluster. I just kept blocking the accounts and tried not to let it bother me too much. I figured he'd get bored enough soon and let it go. That was until one day after classes had finished. I was browsing the small convenience store in the building to grab a drink on my way home. I opened up the fridge to get a bottle of water, and when I closed the door, he was standing right there beside me. He didn't say anything, he just stared daggers at me. I hadn't ever seen him in person before. I'd never agreed to meet him, but I knew straight away this was him. Obviously, I freaked out. I dropped the bottle in place and sprinted out of the store. I didn't walk straight home because I was afraid he'd follow me and find out where I lived. Instead, I went back into school and stayed around areas where there were lots of people until a friend of mine came to meet me. After that, I'd see him all the time when I'd leave class. He'd just be standing there, doing nothing in particular, watching people as they walked past. Then he'd stare at me intently. I made sure to always be with friends when I went to and from class from then on, and didn't go anywhere alone for a while. After a week or so though, the messages suddenly stopped, and I didn't ever see him again. The last time I heard from him was about a year ago, when he messaged me on yet a new Facebook account, asking if we could be friends again because he'd changed, and it was all just a joke. Needless to say, I ignored that message, blocked that account too, and will not be taking up his offer on being friends. I was mindlessly browsing Facebook one day when I received a message to my inbox. Clicking on it, I realized it was from someone who I didn't know. His name was Peter, and he sent me this. "Hi, I was taken aback by how beautiful you are in your picture. I hope you don't find that too forward. I saw you post on insert local company's name here, Wall. I thought your comment was pretty funny. I couldn't resist clicking on your profile and messaging you. Your sense of humor is just like mine, and I'd like to thank you for making me laugh today. I just lost my mother a few months ago, you see, and I've had a real hard time with it. I can't remember the last time I smiled, let alone laughed, so really, thank you." Now, normally I would not reply to messages from people I don't know, but I felt really bad for this guy. I thanked him and told him I was sorry for his loss, and I was glad I could help him laugh. Once he sent me a friend request, I had to let him know though I didn't have any intentions of adding him. I only used Facebook for people I know. The guy said he understood and we said our goodbyes. I thought that would be it. One day, about a week after getting his initial message though, I was out shopping at the local grocery store nearby my home when I noticed a guy looking at me from a few feet away down the aisle I was in. I looked over and smiled nervously. I'm somewhat shy and socially awkward. He smiled back and waved, then looked at what was in front of him. He looked familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on from where. I checked out with my groceries and went home. After putting everything away, I sat down and logged onto Facebook, only to see I had a new message from him. "I like the dress you wore today. It fit your body nicely. Thanks for smiling at me. It made me feel real special." I didn't realize that was him at the store, but seeing his picture again on Facebook definitely matched that guy. I was sort of sketched out by this, but of course it could have just been a coincidence. We did live in the same area after all. I chose not to engage though, just to be safe. About another week goes by and I hadn't heard anything else from him. I was out with some friends at night at a park. just hanging out on the swings like we do when we were teenagers, when I noticed someone off in the distance. They were walking toward the park. My friends and I got spooked and went quiet immediately. I realized when the person was a bit closer that it was Peter. I spoke to my friends in a quiet voice. "Don't panic. Act natural, but we need to leave now. Get in the car." They didn't argue. We got in the car together and drove away. Peter was now gone though. I told my friends who that was and what had been going on. They told me I was just being paranoid. When I got home though, I realized I had another message on Facebook again, once more from him. "So, do you go to that park often?" I noped the fuck out and replied, "Do not ever message me again. My boyfriend is aware of the situation and he's a police officer, so leave me alone." I blocked him. Even though I made up the boyfriend thing to scare him, I guess it must have worked. I haven't heard from him or seen him again in months. I live with 3 people who all know what he looks like and know about the situation as well. They've been keeping a lookout and nothing suspicious has happened so far. That doesn't mean that I don't look over my shoulder every now and then though. When I was around 9, I went to summer camp at the nearby YMCA for a few summers. It was a day camp, and there were different camps you could do. You know, water sports, crafts, canoeing. Each camp lasted for about 1 week. I started the summer by taking one of the craft camps, a special one that lasted for 2 weeks. I was really excited about it, but I was also nervous. I didn't know anyone else in my group, and I was also very shy. The first day, I managed to make friends with an older kid who was in a wheelchair. He was around 17, I believe. I'm not sure what his disability was, but he was very socially awkward and gave off kind of a creepy vibe. I was trying to be nice to him because no one else wanted to talk to him, but he started to make me very uncomfortable. First, he started by talking about how much he hated being in the wheelchair because it made his back hurt. He liked being able to get out at the end of the day and stretch, as well as do some exercises with his physical therapist. That wasn't too bad. I just smile and nod as he talked, not really having too much else to add. At some point, I mentioned to him how I was a dancer and really liked acrobatics class. He asked me to show him some of my moves, so I did a cartwheel. He told me my legs looked beautiful when I stretched them out like that. Being a kid, I didn't really think much of that comment. I did start getting a bit uncomfortable though when he began to tell me about how much he liked my hair, how white my teeth were, how cute I was because I was so little. One day he was talking about stretching outside his wheelchair and mentioned how good it would feel if someone were to walk on his back. "You'd be perfect, just the right size. Would you do that for me one day? I'd love to have you on top of me." He smiled very creepily when he said this. I awkwardly changed the direction of the conversation by telling him how I used to do that for my dad. I was young and stupid. I probably shouldn't have egged him on like that. He got really excited and started talking about how much he'd love it, how good it must have felt for my dad. I bet he loves having his little girl on top of him like that. He reached out to me at this point and put his hand on my knee. I awkwardly shrugged it off and moved away a little. He smiled and started talking about how good it would feel to do cartwheels on his back and jump on him, maybe lie down on top of him and rub his sides. Luckily, my mom drove up a moment later and I was able to leave. This was on the weekend, and the camp was going to continue the following Monday. I didn't mention anything to my mom. I figured he was just lonely and awkward and hadn't meant to be creepy. When I got to camp on Monday, he immediately ran up to me. "I was so upset I couldn't see you this weekend. I missed my little girl." I smiled and awkwardly walked away, but he followed me. We were all going as a group to the craft cabin. He came up next to me and asked if I wanted to sit in his lap and ride to the cabin with him. I politely declined and managed to avoid him for the rest of the day, until I was walking to my mom's car at the very end. He came up to me, grabbed my hand and pulled me towards him. "You know, you really hurt me today. How would you like it if I hurt you too?" I yanked my hand away and walked quickly to the car. I told my mom all about it as soon as I got in. She drove immediately over to the camp office and spoke to the camp leader about it. I told him everything. He assured us he would take care of it immediately. As we were driving away after the meeting, I saw 2 counselors go up to the boy and lead him into the office. The look on his face was like he was going to kill someone. I never saw him again after that. I was told he was kicked out and never allowed to return. For the rest of the week, the camp counselors would check on me and make sure I was okay too. So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up. It was told as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years, and to her credit, I sure have never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind, and probably always will. Makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it, really. So, Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about the early 80s I believe, was a young woman at the time in her mid-20s. She was one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? I can't imagine her being anything other than what she was when she was younger, so I can totally see her doing this too. Driving into the city about a 2-hour or so drive out from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked the man if he needed any help. She told me he was really polite, if not a bit shy. He only asked her for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a big smile and popped open the passenger door for the man, who tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. In all honesty, they talked fairly pleasantly for most of the trip. Friends, the news, the typical happy small talk. She felt like they were getting on really well and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. He seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they had talked about was money and how he was pretty dang strapped for cash at the time. That was why he'd been hitchhiking in the first place. He eventually relented though, and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food, and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her again someday and catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feelings of a good deed done. Now, I'm sorry if you're expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this part is what freaked me out so much as a kid, how nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki always gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me the next part. About a week later, she got a phone call from her new driving buddy. He didn't let her get a single word in edgewise after hello, and immediately told her, "You should be thanking God you were raised so nice. When I first got in your car, I was planning on raping and murdering you once we got to that pit stop. I was gonna steal that car and dump your body in a ditch further down the road and go on my merry way. But you talked to me so kindly and treated me to dinner with a smile on your face. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't live with myself after doing that to such a nice lady. So please, Nikki, never ever pick up another hitchhiker." Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again, and when she tried to redial the number, all she got was a payphone. This is my aunt's encounter. To set the scene, where I live, it's normal that lots of people commute to the big city from the outskirts for work. What I mean is that most of them agree to pay and rent a bus that will drive them to and from work on a daily basis. It's especially popular among nurses, basic office workers, and so on. Young people who don't have or can't yet afford their own cars. The bus will usually take off from a regular bus stop. One day, my aunt was traveling to work by car. It was quite early, probably somewhere around 7 a.m. since she starts at 8. She approached the bus stop, only to see a man waving at cars passing by. He was fairly nicely dressed, a jacket, polished shoes, that kind of stuff, and he was holding a briefcase. Usually, she would not take a stranger in, but come on, this guy must be an office worker. Judging by his looks, he'd probably missed the bus. She decided to be nice and stop by and invite him in. The guy was more than happy, very talkative as well, so off they go. As the journey proceeds, she's getting more and more comfortable. The guy was young, 25-ish maybe, and very funny and easy to talk to. They were getting closer and closer to the city when the hitchhiker says that since they'll most definitely be stuck in traffic on the main road, they better take a less attended one. No red flags going off yet. I mean, he's right. He also wasn't giving any bad vibes at all. Now, what you need to know. This specific city is quite wild. I mean, foreigners will visit and say, wow, it sure is green here. I'll not reveal the exact location, but it's surrounded on all sides by forests. There are actually some forests in the city as well. You'll see nice and flashy office buildings on one side of the river and deep forests on the other. It's crucial for the story. It didn't really matter if you took the main or less attended roads, you'd still get to the city in the end. They drive on, forest all around, which the guy comments on, saying how nice it all looks and blah blah blah. My aunt was smiling and nodding along, and that's when the creepy part kicked in. He turned his head to her and said in a completely normal, lackadaisical voice, "You know, you would look real good in a coffin." And the guy went completely quiet after that utterly horrific statement, gripping his hands on the briefcase tight. She was beyond creeped out now, but tried not to show it and played it cool. And that's when an idea popped into her head. She slowed down and said something must be wrong with the engine because it was getting hard for her to navigate. She drove over to the side of the road and asked the man if he could be so nice as to get out and check for her since she's a woman. She wouldn't know what to do, blah blah blah. He instantly agreed and hopped out of the car. That's when she withdrew and drove the fuck away, leaving that creepy hitchhiker behind. She didn't really care that she'd left him there all alone. What he'd said was creepy as hell. After a few kilometers, she calmed down though, congratulating herself on getting rid of him so quickly, when she noticed that his briefcase was still laying on the passenger seat. What would a normal person do in this case? Probably throw it away or something. But she couldn't resist having a look inside, and believe me, the inside made her nauseous. Instead of papers or pens or documents or whatever else office boys would carry around in their briefcase, she found a neatly folded thin rope and a set of knives as well. Not one, a set of sharp, nice knives. You'd think the guy was a hunter or something, except he was not. Of course, she was freaked out and decided to go to the nearest police station to report what just happened and give them the briefcase as well. As usual here though, the police did not do much. No one fit the description of the man, and the original hitchhiker could not be located after. After that, she never picked up another. I don't think I would either if that happened to me.